What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back for the Borderlands 3 video, and today I wanted to give you guys some tips that I think will help make Borderlands 3's Mayhem mode a little bit easier. Now before we start, I'm gearing this video towards Mayhem Mode 3 True Volatile mode, and for what it's worth, I've mostly been playing Borderlands 3 solo on normal with the co-opetition mode selected. Additionally, I've beaten the entire main story campaign on Mayhem 3 in True Volatile mode, so if you're wondering where all of this advice is coming from, well, now you know. Also, these will be more general tips rather than really in-depth advice. I haven't maxed out every character yet, so I can't talk about specific builds for all of the characters, but some general tips I can give may be useful regardless of which character you decide to play. And of course, definitely be sure to smash like on this video if you think Borderlands 3 is awesome, and failing that, let me know your first thoughts when you first saw this particular head customization. But without further ado, let's go ahead here and start by discussing our first tip, which will be more advice, and that is just to try and be flexible. Thanks to the fact that debuffs can constantly change and can change from area to area, you may find it's not always wise to conform around one primary method of dealing damage. After all, one time you may find that assault rifles will get buffed and pistols will get debuffed, and another time you may find normal bullets will get debuffed while elemental weapons get buffed. So if you really rely on one dominant method of damage output, then you may encounter some issues. A good way to counteract this is simply to have a wide variety of good weapons to choose from for any scenario. Not only should you have at least one great weapon for every element, but it's also a good idea to have said weapons in multiple different weapon types. As an example, rather than having just one really good corrosive pistol, it might be a good idea to get an assault rifle or sniper to complement it should pistols get debuffed and vice versa. Similar things can be said for other aspects of how you play as well. Definitely take the time to swap out class mods, relics, and shields as needed, and also don't be afraid to spec for different action skills or augments either. But again, just be sure to experiment and don't overly commit to one particular strategy or the other. Now for our next couple of tips, we'll be discussing gear, and to start, I'll be talking about item score first. While item score isn't a totally accurate measurement of how good a gun is, as there are definitely some bad weapons with high item scores, I do think it's fair to say that gear with a higher item score is usually better than gear with a lower item score, especially if both items are max level, are blue rarity or above, and aren't anointed. The reason for this is that guns that are non-anointed and have a high item score are usually awesome and tend to be noticeably better than the vast majority of other weapons you can come across. As an example of something you might want to look out for, you'll notice that this blue rarity creature I found has an item score of 575, it's capable of high fire rates, and has a projectile multiplier with an element. As a general rule, and once you reach maximum level or just level 50, try to look for weapons, if they are not anointed, that have an item score above 550. If they are anointed, try to stick with things that are above 570. These will generally tend to be among the very best weapons in the game, and they will serve you well in Mayhem mode. But as a contradictory piece of advice, we should talk about the other side of item score. Though observing and trying to obtain weapons with high item scores is a part of the puzzle, the other issue you can come across is that you'll find something that's in the 580s or 590s that just sucks. With this in mind, you really sort of have to know what's good beforehand, or you'll have to do some experimentation, but I can give you at least one pointer. If you're in the market for a pistol, Jacob's Mashers and Vladov Creeches tend to be pretty exceptional due to the former's projectile multiplier and the latter's potential to spawn with a double barrel mode, which will improve your DPS. The same advice goes for legendaries, as again, some legendaries are just better than others despite the item score. As an example, I found I really like this Trevinator shotgun here, and I think it's a bit better than my Occultist pistol. And this is despite the fact that both actually have the same item score. There's a lot of variation out there, but as a general rule, try to find the better weapons by finding ones with a good item score first, and then from there test them out on your character or build and use the ones that work best. While you're looking for weapons and gear, I'd highly recommend not to be afraid of and try to embrace radiation. While it isn't drastically better if you're playing with Mayhem difficulty off, radiation is in some ways the best element once Mayhem mode is activated. Again, this isn't necessarily because it's stronger or anything, as the traditional elements like fire, shock, and corrosive are still good. It's more so because radiation isn't usually debuffed in Mayhem mode, where the other elements and normal type bullets often are. Because of this, you may actually find that radiation is usually a better method of stripping shields than shock is. Or if incendiary gets dinged, you may find radiation damage is more effective against flesh-based enemies in those types of scenarios. And of course, there are also the benefits of the element itself. Proximity-based damage over time effects can be really good against mobs, and assuming enemies die, they will still explode into radiation clouds which can irradiate other enemies, allowing for some nice chain kills from time to time. Try to always keep a good variety of radiation-based weapons on hand, and if you can, try to get your hands on a radiation hex grenade like this one here, as I've found it's been extremely useful while playing through Mayhem mode. But now it's time we talk about builds. Though I suppose this should go without saying, putting together the best build for your character is really a must. While I admit I haven't reached max level with all of the characters yet, and therefore I don't know all of them inside and out, it's generally a good idea to put together a build that will allow you to maximize your chosen character's damage output while retaining a good survivability and defense. With this in mind, it's probably not a good idea to just use any weapon or any piece of gear on any character and expect to be successful. With that in mind, it's important to reiterate that the right spec and right gear selection is really crucial. As an example, for Moes, you might want to get a high-capacity shield, assuming you decide to go the Shield of Retribution route, or maybe a couple of nice fire elemental weapons to complement the boosts you're receiving to incendiary damage. Or if you decide to go the Demolition Woman route, you might want some decent splash damage type weapons. Just try to make sure everything from your spec to your weapons, shield, relic, and class mod all have good synergy and complement one another. This will go a long way to make Mayhem mode much easier and less of a headache. Now our next tip is going to involve what I think are the most difficult types of enemies, which are the Anointed. While it's fair to point out that some Anointed are easier to take down, like Anointed tanks, some of them are certainly more difficult to take down, as Anointed militants, for example, have what seems like an infinite number of immunities. To make matters worse, there are situations you'll find yourself in where you'll be fighting 3 or more Anointed enemies at once, and you'll either have to fight them or just run away. To have an easier time of taking these things down, always aim for the head and try to use the most powerful fire weapons you have that aren't currently being debuffed. If that doesn't work, I'd recommend you try TD or reloads, as these can also be effective depending on your build, though just keep in mind not to use up all of your ammo. If all else fails and you're fighting 3 of these at once, don't be ashamed to run away if that's an option, since these guys are really tough to fight solo when they appear in groups. If you do have to fight them though, try to take out the weaker ones like the Tinks and Acolytes first, and then move your way to the Maniacs, Goliaths, and Militants after that. Once you get the hang of things in Mayhem mode, I think you'll agree that these types of enemies are usually the hardest to deal with. Always try to fight them one-on-one, and if you can, you might be better off just trying to run. Now this next tip will sound cliche, but it's true in more ways than one, and that is simply that practice makes perfect. As you play on Mayhem 3, you'll naturally get better at it to where you'll be more consistently trying to perform criticals, and you'll also be more used to the increased enemy health and shields. However, on top of that, you'll also be at the point where you have higher Guardian ranks too, meaning you'll have access to more Guardian rank perks. As an example, having Resilient and being able to recover from Fight for Your Life at full health and shields is a huge deal and will make Mayhem mode much easier. Additionally, being able to take advantage of other perks like Hollow Point, Dead Man's Hand, and Topped Off will also put you in a better position and will gradually make Mayhem 3 easier once you acquire them. So in the end, as you gain experience in additional Guardian ranks, things will get much easier and it will be enough to tip the scales in your favor. But this brings us to our final tip, which is going to be a pretty simple one, and that is just to ease yourself into it. Though this is something you may already know, as the game literally tells you to do it, it is worth keeping in mind. It's possible you might not be ready for Mayhem 3 yet, as you might not have the gear you need that will make you powerful enough to effectively take on the challenge. As I said before when discussing item scores, try to make sure a lot of your weapons are at least blue rarity and have an item score above 550. And if they're not, play on the lower Mayhem level modes until you can get some. Also, if you don't have good ways to inflict radiation status effects on your foes, you may also want to wait and or seek those out at lower Mayhem levels before attempting Mayhem 3. One final thing you could do if you insist on playing Mayhem 3 specifically is to try and take on some of the weaker enemies first and then work your way from there. In my experience, this usually involves taking on creatures across the various planets, and then moving up from there to Iridians, then to Maliwan soldiers, and then on to regular bandits with their anointed companions. If you can successfully take on that last group, I think you'll find most other enemies are noticeably easier. Otherwise, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you found it helped you out and made Mayhem 3 a little bit easier for you, definitely be sure to smash like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.